Hello Year 7, this is Miss Bartlett and welcome to your lesson to guide you through part of your second history project, which is on Norman England. So we'll be looking at what happens after William defeats Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. First things first, I just want you to have a go at answering these 5-a-day questions to help you refresh your memory from when you completed your first history project. If you'd like to pause this video and spend about 2 minutes reading and answering the questions, either on your project booklet or a piece of paper, that's fine. Okay? So let's go through these questions then. Number 1. Name the 4 claimants to the throne of England in 1066. So we've got Harold Godwinson, William of Normandy, Harald Hardrada, and Edgar the Atheling. Right, number 2. What date did the Battle of Hastings take place? That would be the 14th of October in 1066. Number 3. Name one reason why William the Conqueror was a strong contender to the throne. So, William was a strong contender to the throne because he was a good military leader and he had support from his army. He had also proven himself to be a capable ruler in Normandy, so this made him quite desirable as a king. Right, number 4. Where did the Battle of Stamford Bridge take place and who was involved? So that took place at York, and those that were involved were Harold Godwinson and Harald Hardrada. Number 5. What are the strengths and weaknesses of using a sword in battle? Well, the strength for a sword is that a well-made sword could cut through your armour and a shield. And a weakness would be if you were not rich enough to have a decent sword made, then you could actually end up having a sword that was of not good quality. So, today we'll be covering certain sections of your booklet. We're only going to have a look at the few ways that William changed England in order to keep control and power throughout his reign. So here's what we'll be looking at. So what happened after the Battle of Hastings, the Feudal System, the Doomsday Book, and tackling that extended writing question at the end. So here are our learning outcomes for today. You're going to examine William's key problems after Hastings and analyse how he dealt with these problems effectively, and then you're going to answer how effective, or explain how effective William the Conqueror's methods were of keeping control in England. Okay, and if you have a look at the example answer that I provided for you on the right hand of your screen, this is how much you should be writing for your evidence and explanation sections of your PE paragraphs. They need to be full of depth and detailed enough to get your point across successfully and in an argumentative way. So, what happened after Hastings? After the Battle of Hastings, William still had to conquer England. William realised that he was in a very dangerous position considering that he had invaded a country that he knew nothing about. He had never been there before and had basically gone off the information that his spies had told him, so he didn't know very much about England. As a foreign invader, he knew the English would want to get rid of him very quickly. William needed to secure his rule by establishing control at one of the major cities in England, which was London. Along the way, a few towns surrendered to William out of fear that if they didn't, then William would punish them severely. And this helped him secure London first and foremost. Okay, so at London, William was able to become the crowned King of England, and he wanted this to be done as soon as possible. His coronation took place on Christmas Day in 1066, and that was at Westminster Abbey. However, during that day, a fight had actually broken out between the Saxons and Norman soldiers outside the abbey. So, whilst London had been secured by William, there were still a number of Saxons that didn't really accept William's rule still. And this came about with one of the problems that we're going to be discussing throughout your project booklet and in the elements of this video. So, one of the problems was that that William had was his soldiers couldn't understand the language of the Saxons, and the Saxons couldn't understand the language of the Normans, and that therefore made it difficult for them to communicate, so they couldn't really express their arguments in a communicative way, which made things difficult. And usually if you can't get your point across, it can almost end in a bit of a aggressive style, or things can get quite nasty. Okay, and it certainly got nasty in this instance. So, what I'd like you to do is read the following problems that are on the right hand side of the screen. So here are William's problems that he's come across. Number 1, England was a big country. There were still Vikings in the north of England, and William was worried that the Vikings would join with the English and fight against William. Number 2, William didn't have any money, and he needed to pay his army so that they would protect him. He did not know how much money people had and what land they owned. Number 3, some of Harold's army was still in London and they didn't like William. And number 4, some of the English lords were not happy that William was their king. William could not trust them to keep their areas under control, and William needed to gain their trust in order to control the country. So what I'd like you to do is to reread those reasons and problems again, and I'd like you to rank them in an order of importance from his most important problem, which you would label number 1, to his least important problem, which is number 4. So in other words, you're looking at the problem that William needs to deal with the most, all the way down to the problem that William could probably deal with at a later date. It's not an immediate problem that needs solving. So if you want to pause this video and spend about a minute and a half just rereading through those problems and then ranking them. So let's have a look at how William solved his problems. So one of the first methods of control that William decided he was going to act on is controlling the land and controlling everyone's place in society. Now, before the schools closed, we had a look at how Anglo-Saxon societies worked, and what we're going to do is we're going to compare how each society worked. Okay. Before the Battle of Hastings, you'd find at the top of the social system was the royal family. Okay, so that consisted of the king and any close people that had a common ancestry with the king. People were then organised by their level of importance after the king. They were followed by the earls and then the thanes, and then you'd have the peasants and slaves at the bottom. Okay, now these people were expected to be loyal to the king, okay, and the royal family. However, not much was given in return for their loyalty to these people, so they were essentially given their loyalty for nothing. However, William thought that he needed to establish some form of control in that society and controlling the land. So once William had become King of England, he had to decide how he was going to govern the country. He did not want the old English nobles to keep their lands, as he feared they would become too powerful and they might overthrow him, so take him off of his throne. He also thought that all the land in England belonged to him. England, however, was too large for him to manage all by himself, though. So William introduced this new hierarchy system that would help him still own England by sharing the land out in exchange for people's homage to him. Now, homage means that they're giving him loyalty. They're going to pay loyalty to him, an allegiance. And this was known as the Feudal System. And most people he had lent land to helped him in the Battle of Hastings, and he was rewarding them for the help. So let's have a look at how the feudal system worked. Okay, so we can see here that we've got the king at the top, we've got the barons here. It says there was about 200 in total. Then you'd have the knights, where you would have about 4,000 knights. And then you've got villeins, which is just another word for peasants and slaves and farmers, people who worked on the land. And there would be 1.5 million of those villeins in total. So we can see here that if we look at this side of the feudal system, you've got that the king is lending land to the barons are lending land to the knights, and the knights are lending land to the villeins. Now, it looks as though that William is just giving away his land to everyone, but actually, as I said before, he's giving away land in return for like people paying homage to him, giving them their loyalty. Okay, so for example, we've had the king give his land away to the barons to the knights, and the knights to the villeins. Now, in return, the villeins, they're going to pay for the land, and they're going to work on the land and give food to the knights. The knights, in return for their land from the barons, they're going to pay for the land and fight for these barons if it was needed. And then when it comes to the barons are going to pay the king for the land and provide knights for the king. So the king is getting something out of all of the land that he's lending to these people. He's coming out on top, essentially, by gaining a lot of money, a lot of land, and he's gaining knights for his army. And that was really important for William. He needed land, and he needed soldiers for his army as well, because he was frightened that he was going to be overthrown by the English and by any potential foreign invaders such as the Vikings. Okay, how much did the feudal system affect these groups? So what I would like you to do after I've finished explaining this task, I want you to pause this video and have a go at that table. So the task is to read the information in the table about how the feudal system worked for the following groups. So we've got the king, the barons and bishops. So the bishops were also included in that second tier because they were quite powerful within the church and were just as influential as the barons. We've got the knights, and then we've got the peasants or villeins. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to think about whether the feudal system was a positive or negative system for each group. So all you have to do is just write positive or negative in each of these boxes. And then I would like you to analyse how the feudal system helped William gain control and power over each of these groups. Okay? So if you want to pause this video and spend between 5 and 10 minutes rereading the information from the previous slide and the new information you've got on your table and answering those questions. Okay. The second method of control that we're going to look at today is the Doomsday Book. So what I would like you to do is to have a look at this source and answer these questions. Okay, so you've got what can you see in the source, what do you think is happening in the cartoon, and why do you think this might be happening? So just spend no more than a minute analysing that cartoon and picking out what you can see and what you're inferring from it as well. Okay, so let's pick out some of those main points that we can see in this source. So in the first section of this cartoon, we can see that what looks like to be a family of farmers or people that are farming on the land. We could consider them as villeins, and we can clearly see that somebody is riding towards them. You can just make out that there's a little horse and he's making his way towards these villeins. In the next section, it looks as though that a man is pointing to one of the lords. and then we've got him giving instruction to something, potentially, or telling them what they have to do. And then in the third section, we have got that some people, like the lanes, are lining up to give information potentially. Okay, and we can see that somebody is writing this information down. Okay. What was the Doomsday Book then? Okay. So the Doomsday Book was a huge survey that was ordered by William the Conqueror in 1086 to find out how much land and resources and animals were owned at the time in England, and the size of how much taxes that William could raise. Because like I said before, that money was a great problem for William because he hadn't any money or hadn't got any money for his army and he needed to pay them desperately. The information collected was in 2 huge books in the space of around a year. However, William died before it was actually fully completed. So William was keen to know about the country that he had conquered and how much it was worth. So, like I said, he needed to raise money to defend England from possible invasion threats from the Vikings and to pay for his wars that were fought in France. The size of his army, the size of the army William needed meant that it would cost a lot to maintain, and William needed to find out how much tax he could raise. In 1085, so this is how the Domesday Book was conducted. William sent officials all over England to visit every village and ask a series of detailed questions. They interviewed the priest, the steward. The steward was the man who would organise the farm work in the village, and 6 elderly villagers in each village. The officials took a year to visit 13,000 villages, and soldiers who travelled with them threatened to kill people if they didn't tell the truth. A second group visited the villages later to check the people had been honest. So this is what the Domesday Book would look like, or it does look like. There is a second one that's just a tiny little bit smaller than this one, but it does contain records of every single animal that was owned by the villagers, every bit of land that was owned as well, and essentially how much they owned and how much money they had. So all of the records from the village surveys were sent to Winchester, where one man wrote it down in Latin. Latin was the language of Christianity, which is the religion that William worshipped. And the surveys filled 2 huge books contained with approximately 2 million words. The book gave William knowledge, and knowledge is quite a powerful thing, and this meant that William could work out how much each person could afford to pay in taxes. William knew exactly how many people he could get him to fight for him. And thirdly, William could settle any quarrels over who owned which bit of land. So when he's dishing out all that land due to the feudal system, he needs to know exactly who owns what and who he can give that piece of land to without having any fighting going off or any arguments. So here is your next task. I would like you to read through these points of the Domesday Book, and then I would like you to explain which of the points were useful and which of the points were not useful. So I'll just go through them with you. Number 1, it records only the men in a village, not the women, children or relatives. Number 2, it tells us that most of the land was owned by 200 Normans, the church or King William. They had taken it from over 2,000 Anglo-Saxons after 1066. Number 3, it does not tell us how ordinary people fought, what their homes were like, or what clothes they wore. Number 4, it does not include a survey of London, Northumberland, or much of northern England, and only some of Wales. Number 5, it showed the total value of England was £37,000. This was a very large amount considering £10 made you rich. And number 6, it showed how there were few towns, lots of meadows and woodland, and plenty of farm animals, and most people worked by farming the land. So once you've read through that and understood what each point means, I would then like you to answer the following structure at the bottom. Okay, so I want to know which of the useful points you think are, and what it allowed William to, and how it allowed William to control England, and what the least useful points of the Doomsday Book were. So if you want to pause this video for about 5 minutes and just write a short answer at the bottom. Okay. So we've looked at two other methods of control that William had to keep power and control throughout England. So they were the Feudal System and the Doomsday Book. Now, in the rest of your project booklet that you've been given, you will have looked at two other methods. So that was castle building and dismantling rebellions that happened throughout England. So using all of the information that you have collected from the other two methods of control and from the Feudal System and Doomsday Book, what you're going to do now is to write 2 PE paragraphs explaining how effective William the Conqueror's methods were of keeping control in England. So I'm just going to talk you very quickly through how you would answer this question. So the first things first, you need to identify one of the 4 methods that we have looked at or discussed or you have done yourself. Okay, so that can be castle building, dismantling rebellions, creating the feudal system, or conducting a survey with the Doomsday Book. For example, he solved this problem by, so that would mean you would have to tell me which problem he was solving at this point with this method of control. So if you're talking about controlling the land, keeping it under control essentially, then you could talk about the feudal system. If you're talking about raising money, raising taxes, you could use the Doomsday Book. And then I'd like you to describe in detail, using the information from the work you've just done, about solving William's problems and how he kept control of England. And then I would like you to explain how effective this was. So I think this method of control was effective because, so analyse exactly what it did and how this achieved William's desired approach of controlling England and keeping his power secure. I'd then like you to repeat that same method again of explaining how William's methods of keeping control were in England. So in this instance, I want you to choose a different type of method. So you could use the dismantling of rebellions or castle building, and then describe it in detail again, and then evaluate it. So do you think it was more or less effective than your previous point? And then I want you to tell me why. And then, as a bit of an extension, overall, I think William's methods of control were wholly, so completely effective, partially effective, or not very effective because. So you're just giving me your opinion on whether you think these methods of control were ultimately effective. Okay? So that is the end of our lesson year 7. If you've got any issues that you want to address, or if you're unsure of anything, please feel free to email myself, Mrs. Hudson, or Mr. Brown, and we will help you the best that we can. Okay? Right, thank you very much for watching this video lesson, and I hope it's been very helpful. Okay, bye-bye.